And now, it's time for the Nailsin Ratings. Smart Aleck comments by me, Mr. Nailsin, on all things concerning life, entertainment, culture, politics, and whatever else the cat may drag in. Hey, Mr. Nailsin here. In the previous Nailsin Ratings, I did a video on The Walking Dead and all about Season 7. And in it I said I'd do an update because at the time there was still a few more episodes left in the season, and the hopes that maybe that would resolve it and kind of save the season. Well, no, that didn't happen. Season 7 is the absolute worst season of The Walking Dead, which was once an excellent program. Amazing performances, gripping stories in that world. And as I've repeatedly said on the subject of Walking Dead, is repetition is the problem of the show. But for Season 7, that wasn't the only problem. I think with the repetition of doing the same formula that they've set down for the show, and the villains that are just copies of previous villains and all that, they're kind of flailing for what to do. And so at this point, you had a season where long-established characters are giving dialogue that just doesn't fit them at all. And I went through that in the previous video. So basically, the finale was just god-awful. And the worst of it of all was at the ending, where Rick is just going to sit there on his knees and just watch Negan beat his son's head in with Lucille the Bat. Because keep in mind, Rick doesn't know that Shiva the Tiger is about to come in and attack the Saviors. It's just all of a sudden there's Shiva and Saviors taste great. Yeah, well, Rick doesn't know that's going to happen, so basically he's just going to sit there. I lost, and now I'm going to lose Carl. Yeah, no, he would leap at Negan, and sure, he's probably going to die, but you're just not going to sit there and watch this man beat your son to death. So that was pretty god-awful. And then, to just make it worse, Ezekiel shows up and delivers this terrible line of, "Alexandria will not fall this day." It's like he's doing a Brian Blessed impersonation from the 1980 Flash Gordon movie. This will be remembered as Flash Gordon's Day. And the difference being that the Flash Gordon movie was meant to be campy. You don't do that in Walking Dead. And worst of all, probably, as far as the what Season 8 might be, is that the Trash Heap people survived this battle. They should have gotten rid of those guys because they just dragged the show down. They're so ridiculous. They're not credible. It's just a bad idea all around. And I'm suspecting they're going to become these characters we've seen in the comic book, which, granted, weren't as bad as the Trash people with their Yoda language and everything, but still pretty bad anyway. By comparison, now the comic book's a little bit better. And about the Trash people is that I just don't buy that they would end up in that state that soon. Walking Dead is a couple of years old since the apocalypse happened, whereas in the comic book, this group I'm referring to, in case you haven't read it, I'm not going to go into it, but there's a bit of gap of time in the story where they kind of leap forward where they're at in that series. So I don't know how many years have gone by and whatnot at that point, but still a bit hard to swallow that people would end up like that. I mean, if you wanted to have a bunch of people who went crazy, you would think you would establish like there was a cult, because there's plenty of cults around in the real world, and a lot of their cult leaders predict the end of the earth and all that, and you could have had this guy who does that, and then suddenly he's the one, and people would start believing in him and all that. And you would have them all be kind of weird and stuff because they would think this guy knows what he's talking about. Well, they didn't do that. So I don't really buy into the explanations for these groups that they've had, like the Wolves and stuff like that. But the Trash Heap has got to be the absolute worst. And instead of killing them off, no, apparently at least the leader, I forget her name, but she's going to be back. She's been promoted to series regular, so they're going to go with that for a while. So I'm not optimistic about Season 8 for what Season 7 has done to it. I don't know if you can repair this damage. And like I said in the previous video, Walking Dead needs an end game. They need to go somewhere. They need to figure out how to resolve this, because right now they're starting to flail, and the repetition is just getting old. Similar problem for Fear the Walking Dead. That's coming up. I'm dubious as to what it can do for itself, since they're not going to pursue the virus, which I think would be an excellent plot point to pursue. It's the only reason to even do a spinoff, because there's no other story to tell in this world of Walking Dead. But we're not going to get that. So I just don't see how they're going to save this show as far as returning it to the excellence that it had achieved. So it's sad to see it just go on and become a mockery of what it once was. But I'm afraid that's where we're going with this show. So we'll see. But for now, especially on Season 7 of The Walking Dead, that gets 1.5 stars out of 5. Because it was that bad, and it pissed me off that much. And that's sad. It really is. All right, thanks for listening, and stick around for this channel. I'll be posting more of these little videos. Occasionally there's a few of these audio versions of these on SoundCloud, but I don't have a premium account, so there won't be that many there. So, and do check out my podcast at RadioMisfits.com. New episodes every Saturday of the Mr. Nailsin Show. Yes, and occasionally I even have a guest. So it's fun. Check that out. All right. Goodbye. And that was the Nailsin Ratings. Commentary from me, Mr. Nailsin. The views and opinions expressed in the Nailsin Ratings do not necessarily reflect those held by Radio Misfits or any other entity that Mr. Nailsin may or may not be involved with. So any complaints or comments should be sent to @Mr. Nailsin on Twitter, where they'll be promptly ignored and or blocked.